Fight fans and D-Gens, we are back here for a very special pay-per-view episode, UFC 281, Israel Adesanya taking on Alex Pereira. Boys, before we get into anything, can't wait. I just can't wait.
Gosh, man. I mean, look, 2022 has been a phenomenal year, and I'm just so incredibly blessed to, be in attendance at UFC 281 with you guys. On Saturday, it's going to be absolutely insane, lifelong memory, and just can't wait to meet you guys in person.
Come a long way, guys. This is like we've literally been talking about this card, I think, pretty much since we started, Fight Night, right? So it's like to see how far we've come, multiple episodes behind us, and certainly a big card on Saturday. Looking forward to it. And we're going to be there live. I mean, pandemonium is what's to be expected.
The Big Apple.
I mean, we're going to be in the mecca of all sports, right? I mean, MSG, Madison Square Garden. It is crazy, though, right? I mean, to think about it all, how we started this out, just being in the Discord, right? The three of us posting plays, some write-ups here and there. Eventually, we were like, we're going to start a show. We got that off the ground, and then we were like, we got to do an event with the Fight Night guys at it, and it's finally coming up this weekend. For anyone that follows the show, that follows us in the Discord, on Twitter, make sure you're on all our socials. I'm sure we'll try to pump out some content there while we're at the event, maybe throughout the week. Who knows? Since I'm in the area, I might even, I was thinking about this before, I might try to go to the press conference, right? I mean, it's going to happen during the week. Get some stuff up on our TikTok, on our Instagram, on our Twitter feed, and the Discord. So make sure you follow along, because we're definitely going to try to push some content out from this massive experience. And before we get into that, just retouch on last week a little bit. UFC Vegas 64, I believe it was, headlined by Amanda Lemos taking down Marina Rodriguez via knockout. Unreal performance by Amanda Lemos there. It kind of sucks, right, that it seems like it's light is being taken away from that performance, I think, by what happened in the Derek Minner fight, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, just looking around, what's going on social media, right, and just the abundance of question marks surrounding that fight, surrounding the line movement, right? I think Derek Minner was like plus 180 all week long, up until about 90 minutes prior to the fight going off, and he got steamed all the way up to plus 380, plus 400 in some spots. And it's worth talking about, I think, spending a little bit of time to discuss that, right? The integrity of the sport when you have someone who's his coach, right? I'm not going to name names, but his coach there is a prominent gambling member in the MMA community. People pay him for his picks and his gambling advice, and to see him cornering a fighter that is very clearly injured, he's compromised. Information had to have gotten out somewhere, whether it been him placing the action, him letting people know what was going on the inside there. But it definitely is worth touching. I want to get your guys' thoughts on the matter. I'm pretty sure I know where you guys stand on this, though.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about a promotion that within the last month, right? I mean, they just put in a regulation that is not allowing fighters to place bets. And, you're talking about integrity here, and it really has to go across the board. You talk about a fighter, betting on themselves. What differentiation is it from a coach, betting on the sport as well? So definitely not what you like to see. I think as time goes on, it'll catch up to that coach there. It was an incredibly difficult thing to watch there, with that line movement, knowing that he clearly had a leg injury there in Minner. And I think it'll get cleaned up as time goes on, as the exposure of betting and all that continues to expand. But definitely not what you want to see, especially from that camp there.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I mean, we were on Minner early on in the week. I mean, we were on his side. We thought the submission threat would be there, and quickly, as soon as the fight started, you kind of left scratching your head a little bit. And I guess you got to ask yourself. I mean, the three of us, we're doing this show, every week. We're trying to break down these fights and give out plays that we think is gonna hit, and cash for a lot of folks that follow us. And when you see things like this, I think it does bring up the question that when you're not as close to these fights, to these line movers, these guys in Vegas that are sitting under the hood and kind of moving these things, they're ultimately going to be the ones that are going to get that kind of alpha first and foremost. And there comes times where we're kind of left holding the bag, and unfortunately that was the case on Saturday. And I think some of the things that have happened in the last few weeks, certainly with the TJ Dillashaw injury, I think that kind of magnifies what happened on Saturday just a little bit more. But yeah, you know, definitely left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. Certainly not what you want to see. And, you know, again, not to name names, but when you look at kind of who's cornering who and kind of what's going on, I'm not going to call a spade, but it's one of those things where it's fishy. And usually when there's smoke, there's fire. And I'll leave it at that. You know, I'll leave it to everyone else to kind of make their own assessments.
Yeah.
It's just an unfortunate situation for the sport. I think I saw something that the last time a line movement of this size occurred in the UFC, that there were arrests made and that, you know, fights actually were fixed. So if there is a proper investigation going to this, it really wouldn't surprise me if that's the result of their findings. But it reminds me, because Kev, you're talking about like how they just passed that new code where fighters aren't allowed to bet on UFC fights, regardless of if they're involved in it or not. But that doesn't go for trainers, that doesn't go for coaches, that doesn't go for you know, doctors or whatever you may have, right? People at the Performance Institute. And it leads me to think about my time working, because I spent time working for the New York Jets in the NFL for a little bit, and I was like ground level worker there, operations staff, like hundreds of us, right? Yeah. We had to sign papers saying that we were not allowed to bet not only on NFL, we were not allowed to bet on any sports since we were affiliated with a professional organization like that. I'm talking bottom of the barrel employee, right? And it's just crazy to me. Like, obviously the NFL is this long mainstay core 4 sport institution in the United States, right? So they've had to deal with gambling regulations for, you know, forever now, right? And something like the UFC, where they're still evolving, they're still growing, like they've been around for a while, but in terms of being one of these mainstays in the mainstream, and now with legalized gambling, it's still very early on. So it wouldn't surprise me if something comes out where if you're affiliated with the UFC in any way, you could be in the front office, you could be doing anything, where they may just, you know, you may not be allowed to bet not only on UFC, but any other sports like that. And I think that's really the only way you could kind of eliminate any doubt, you know, when you're looking at these fights and these injuries, because looking at the injury that Minner sustained, right, it occurred when he kicked him in the body, right? And it wasn't like anything happened in that movement or in that kick, or it wasn't a non-contact injury. So it leads you to believe that that was a pre-existing injury, right? He aggravated it on the kick, and it was all down from there. It's not like, you know, line movement happened and he happened to get injured on a kick. Like, that knee was seriously compromised, and it was very obvious, I think.
Very. And you know, with that potential injury, right? You know, earlier in that day, we saw the Chase Sherman fight get canceled, and you know that was going to be on the main card. So, you know, in hindsight, it would make sense that the UFC said, "Listen, kid, just go out there and just step on the octagon, right? Because we've already got a main event cancellation."
And his fight was the one that slated up into the main card to take in that spot of Sherman. So it's kind of just wacky how that all played out.
Yeah.
But
and you know, we heard it last week on when Mike Davis was on the show, right? You'll get fighters that, you know, will fight injured to collect that insurance money, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean,
unfortunately, it's one of those
all along.
Yeah, so you know, at the end of the day, we'll never, I think, know what truly happens unless they have some sort of investigation opens, which I don't think is going to happen at this point. But you know, unfortunate to see, and you know, especially that, like I said, we were sort of one of the ones left holding the bag there. But you know, it happens, and you know, again, we just got to keep on moving and try to keep finding the right plays, like we're always doing.
You live and learn, right? And it's one of those things where we kind of just take this and learn from it, right? You know, if we see a fighter that's having a 100-cent, you know, increase in their price, you know, within 2 hours of fight time, it should be like a round 1 finish on the the opposition, like auto bet. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. And man, I was so incredibly shocked to see that shoot up to plus 330 when he was right at plus 175. I mean, you just never see that. So it's just one of those things to just kind of keep an eye on as we, you know, continue this journey.
Yeah, and Dan mentioned before, it was coming on the tail end of the TJ Dillashaw fiasco that happened just a few weeks ago. Coming into that fight, shoulder dislocated, they said 20 plus times leading up into the fight. And, you know, it begs the question, like, at what point do we have to get some sort of injury report, you know, with the UFC coming into these fight weeks? I mean, every other sport, professional sport, is obligated to provide an injury report of any kind. If you're seeing any sort of treatment, you need to be listed on that injury report. And I understand that it gives such a big advantage to the opposition when you know all these details, because at the end of the day, every fighter is going through something, right? So it's kind of like a gray area what we're leading into. But with the new force that is legalized gambling, you have to think of all these extra precautions that the UFC needs to put in place, not just to protect the integrity of the sport, but to protect the sport itself from crumbling underneath itself. So I would have been remiss not to talk about that, touch on that. Like I said, it is taken away from the light of Amanda Lemos, right? I mean, she went out there and dominated a top 10 woman that's been in there for the last 6 or so years in Marina Rodriguez. So it's just a shame that it takes away from that. Kudos to Amanda Lemos. Co-main on this card is going to be one to watch out to see what happens for the future of that division is taking place in the strawweight division. And without further ado, let's hop into this card that is 281, the main card here. And leading it off, we have Dan Hooker taking on Claudio Puelles. Dan Hooker obviously has not had the best streak of luck lately. He tried that featherweight experience going against Arnold Allen, who we just saw. Obviously an injury kind of derailed that performance, but I think we saw enough in that first round to know that he is a legit prospect. He has real tools, real skill set that will dominate that division. And Claudio Puelles, man, this guy just snatches limbs. If he could get a knee bar on you, he's going to get it. I'm going to let Dan start this one off because with someone with such a Brazilian jiu-jitsu background like Puelles, it makes sense to start off with the jiu-jitsu Dan himself.
Yeah, not to mention we got another Dan here fighting, right? Who I'm not really a fan of. I mean, Dan Hooker. I've alluded to this in past episodes where you get fighters that kind of find themselves at a crossroads in their career, maybe come to the realization that they're never going to win a title, and we're looking to kind of see where they fit in the UFC pecking order. Are they going to hang around and act as a sort of gatekeeper? Are they going to try and make another run at another weight class, which we saw Hooker try in his last fight against Arnold Allen to no avail? I think for Puelles, this is actually a great opportunity for him to get a win off of fairly known name. I mean, Hooker has been sort of piggybacking off of Adesanya's hype train for the longest time, and because of that, he is pretty well known, and it's part of the reason why he's on the main card for such a big event. So I think Puelles, a guy who has had multiple finishes in the UFC, a lot of different types of submission finishes, which I've said this in the past. When you want to look at and sort of identify good submission artists, it's all about what kind of submissions are they finishing with. Are they all rear naked chokes, or is there a variety in there? And we see with Puelles, it's the latter. He's finishing guys with knee bars. He's finishing guys on the feet. He's got rear naked choke finishes. I mean, the guy seems very well rounded. And in a situation like this, where I also think we're presented with a scenario where Hooker is used to being the much taller, longer guy in there. He still will be, but I don't think the advantages that he typically holds are going to be that prevalent. And because of that, I think Puelles is going to be the hungrier guy in there. I think Puelles is going to be the guy with the more finishing upside. And, again, I do feel that just from a name standpoint, a lot of people are going to see Dan Hooker on here and, kind of look to auto bet that. I see a lot. I can foresee a lot of, city kickboxing parlays or boosted parlays along that. We'll typically see that on Adesanya cards, right? He's got multiple teammates fighting on this card, and I think this is a great spot for Puelles. I think Puelles is actually ripe for a finish of Dan Hooker. I actually have him submitting Hooker fairly early because we've seen that when Hooker gets on his back, his defense is rudimentary at best. I mean, the guy can get finished on the ground, and against a slick jiu-jitsu fighter like Puelles, who does also power on the feet, I can absolutely see the threat here. I mean, why would Puelles want to, fight in Hooker's world when he can just kind of take advantage of that gap in his game? So I really like Puelles here as a play.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, no, I mean, you look at a guy in Dan Hooker, just for a little context, right? I mean, obviously losing 4 of his last 5, coming versus names of, Islam Makhachev, Arnold Allen, Poirier, Chandler. So obviously it's not the no spring chickens there, but and look, if you just take it a little step back, Dan Hooker from 2017 to 2020, man, he was on an incredible run, going 7-1, great wins, right? Felder, Gilbert Burns, Jim Miller. So clearly he showed flash, at that point in time. But when you're talking about like this chapter where he's, lost 4 or 5, clearly there's going to be that psychological factor of, it's almost like you're just taking so many steps back, and now he's really got to work his way up. And you're talking about a guy in Puelles, right? I mean, in 2021, transferred to Sanford MMA, truly taking this profession seriously. And I think we saw that, in his interview versus after the Clay Guida fight, when he put him in a knee bar in the first round. You can just tell that the man, truly cares about the sport. And like you said, Dan, that finishing upside is real, right? I mean, 12 wins, 8 by submission, 3 by knockout, and it's incredibly crafty. We're not just talking about a rear naked choke every time out, a wide range of variety. And, you talk about those scrambles, man. I mean, it's a thing of beauty, just the way he's able to snatch that up and, know what he wants and just synchronize it correctly. And, I was watching that Dan Hooker fight versus Hack Press, and I think if Dan Hooker takes that route, and wants to like be in that dirty clinch and even land a few takedowns, I think it's going to get really ugly for Hooker, like very quick, right? I mean, Puelles is one of those fighters, right? Like if you have someone, like if he has someone in his guard, right? Like that's what he wants, right? He wants to find a limb. He wants to find that finishing thread. And, that hunger factor is going to be huge. That finishing upside is significantly stronger on the Puelles side. And so for that reason, I'm all on Puelles here. Since his, Ultimate Fighter, Latin America, lost there, 5-0 in the UFC. Again, just continuing to evolve. And I don't think I can say the same about Hooker. We know what we're going to get in Hooker. And I expect Puelles to finish this fight in round 1 or round 2.
Yeah, I'm going to build off your last take there. You know what you're going to get with Hooker. I'm going to use that to make my argument that we don't know what we're going to get with Hooker, right? Like I view him as like the curious case of Dan Hooker, because we've seen him perform at like these top levels against these top guys. I mean, the man was 10 to 15 seconds away from finishing Dustin Poirier, right? And, round ended, wound up just taking so much damage in that fight. And we see it, from time to time in this sport where absolute wars like that just take it all out of you, right? I mean, the first one that comes to mind for me is Rory McDonald, and his fights with Robbie Lawler, just never the same fighter afterwards. And we kind of see that with Dan Hooker, and it's never a promising sign when a fighter cuts down a weight class, right, as a last ditch effort, and then they get finished. And now we see him back up at his last weight class. So it was a failed experiment. No one really knows where his confidence level is at. With that being said, I think that there are some valid excuses on the Hooker side, not to, give him an easy way out, but obviously looking at his resume here, Michael Chandler, first round knockout. Michael Chandler currently is one of the top guys in that lightweight division, making a name for himself ever since he came to the UFC. He's been on a mission. And, other than that, came out, beat Nasrat Haqparast very easily, very, very easily. And, that's an example I think we could take here, because Nasrat isn't that upper echelon of the lightweight division, right? He's like one of those middling guys who can beat the guys behind him, is going to struggle to get guys in front of him. And I feel like you can equate that experience to Puelles a little bit here. But then when we look at his next fight, he took Islam Makhachev on 8 days notice, 10 days notice, got submitted there on the first takedown. Nothing to be said about that. But then you look at that Arnold Allen fight, and that's where you start to really get concerned. Just as I mentioned, going down in weight class, coming back up off the finish. And, I think on the feet, this is pretty clear Dan Hooker advantage. Puelles does have a nice body kick that is open because he's a southpaw, but Dan Hooker being a switch stance fighter, I don't necessarily know if that body kick is going to be there for Puelles. Puelles, he really depends on his length to get takedowns a lot. And being that Dan Hooker is a taller fighter, I'm not sure if Puelles is necessarily going to be able to get those takedowns that he's so accustomed to, because he's not really slick with anything. He's just reaching for a leg. And since he's so long, he's able to get you, and then he really just falls down and kind of takes you down from there. But with Puelles, it's tough to bet against him, because when you're betting against a guy like him, you're betting against a guy where the floor is lava. So Dan Hooker, if he gets to the mat either offensively or defensively, it's just an awful situation, awful place to be, because as Dan mentioned, Puelles has submissions from just about everywhere. And it's tough to bet a favorite when that's the case. It's a little Mackenzie Dern-esque, right? In a 3-round fight here, it's going to be a little less opportunities to be able to cinch that choke or submission in. And it's just a little bit of an up in the air fight. I do think in the standing, though, Puelles has some deficiencies in his defense. I think that he's able to get hit He's not really ducking out of the way of punches. I think that he absorbs a lot of strikes. And for that reason, I don't really know who's going to win this fight, but I do think that this one goes under inside the distance.
Nico Hardman touchdown. Let's go.
Sorry, I saw that. But I think this one is just pretty much a lock to go under 2.5. I think currently sitting at minus 130 on certain books. I don't think DraftKings has it up yet, but the way I see this playing out is if Puelles is going to win, it's going to be, inside the distance. Likely a scenario is going to be by a submission. And Dan Hooker, I mean, if he's going to win, I could see him clipping Puelles on the feet, whether it be a head kick. It could even be a knee on the approach for Puelles here. And I could just see multiple ways that this one finishes inside the distance. If you want to get a little bit contrarian, Dan Hooker by decision is not a horrible play, but it's definitely not one I'm trying to get behind. I struggle finding a side here, but I do like the under.
And we're taping this a little bit early on in the week, so I'm seeing obviously props aren't out yet, but I do see the under 2.5 here at minus 145, and I do like that. I mean, it's this fight is sitting right within that minus 150, minus 140 range, and typically when we'll see a high level fight sitting around those odds, I tend to lean the finish, so I do think the under is a good play here.
Yeah, no, I love it. And, look, I want to say for the record, like, I'm not looking at a 32-year-old Daniel Hooker and saying like he's over the hill, like physically. I think that it's just mentally is where Puelles is going to have that advantage, because like at the end of the day, you look at these finishes that, where Hooker is getting finished, it's like he's basically taking on a flurry. It's not like he's going out flatline like a Tony Ferguson where like that chin is just abysmal. I don't think that I'm going to, say that Hooker's chin is washed up. He's still only 32 years old. Mind you, he's had a pretty illustrious career in the UFC. But, I just think with that psychological factor, Puelles, that finishing ability, I expect him to – I would love to see a knee bar in public. That'd be incredible. But
that'd be sick. Or Peruvian necktie right then.
Yeah.
That's my specialty, man.
From the Peruvian himself.
Again, when you see a guy who has been submitted in the past, and you combine that with a crafty, creative submission artist, I like Puelles, and I'll probably be taking a stab at Puelles by submission once the props come out.
Yeah, and I touched on the excuses for Dan Hooker a little bit before, and one of them being that he hasn't really gotten like a full training camp in New Zealand lately, right? The past 2-3 years for him with all the COVID circumstances, it's hard to enter and exit New Zealand. So I know he's been doing a lot of his camps all over the place. I think I saw that this is like his first full training camp back at City Kickboxing, training with Izzy, obviously get one of his main training partners here for a title against Alex Pereira. So there are certain things you can look at with Hooker that you could kind of cherry pick and like about it, but for me, it's not enough to back him at this minus 160 sign, all things considered. But with that being said, I think we can move on to this next fight here. And this is a little painful for me, right? It's a Frankie Edgar retirement fight going up against Chris Gutierrez here in MSG. Last time we saw Frankie Edgar was a year ago in MSG. Took on Chito Vera, lost that one by a devastating head kick knockout right up the pipe, and it was a bad night for Frankie Edgar fans there. I actually bet Frankie Edgar in that spot. I forget what the line was. It was probably somewhere around plus 200, plus 250-ish. And for the first 12 minutes, I felt really good about it. I think if I'm not mistaken, Edgar was up on 2 out of the 3 judges' scorecards going into that third round. So we're not talking about like a super washed Frankie Edgar. I know he hasn't had the best of luck in his last few fights, but look at who the guy's fighting, right? Chito Vera, Corey Sandhagen. He beat Pedro Munoz, lost to the Korean Zombie, then he lost to Max Holloway. Like, those are up top of the level, top of the food chain, all-time greats. I mean, with Max Holloway and the Korean Zombie. So it's nothing to be ashamed about. And, with retirement fights, they're always a tricky, fickle bitch, right? Because you're worried about a fighter being 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And in a sport like this, you have to be all the way committed. And I think that there's a little bit of an acceptance here for Frankie Edgar because I don't think that he has 1 foot out. I think that people around him want him to leave the sport, that they're trying to drag him out. I know he's spoken on this before, but he is like really all into the sport. I don't see him going out here just to collect one final paycheck and kind of let the lights dim from there. I think he's going to come out here, put on one of his best performances of late. I actually see him getting the win here, plus 180 as a dog. I really like the matchup for him. Chris Gutierrez, his main weapon here is leg kicks that opens up everything else in his arsenal. I mean, I don't want to call him one-dimensional, but he's a striker. He's not really going to take this one to the mat. He's not going to grapple, and he doesn't really have great submission skills. And being that the leg kick is really the door that opens up everything else for him, it's going to be tough to land leg kicks on someone like Frankie Edgar, who's constantly shifting his weight, who's constantly moving around the octagon. He has excellent footwork, and that's what I'm touching on from his last fight from Chito Vera. He showed that he still has that footwork. Like, he hasn't lost that step that you would really see the fall off of the cliff from a 40-year-old fighter. And I think that that's a promising sign here. People might be too blind to the fact that, he was winning that fight over Chito Vera last time out. They're going to see under minus 200 on someone in Chris Gutierrez, who's 30 years old, 10-year age gap, and coming off a big finish himself over Dana Batgaril in knockout fashion, right? I think it was a spinning back fist that he got him with. It was something crazy, and he's on a run of his own. But for the matchup where the skill sets line up, I think Frankie Edgar is just an elite talent. You could argue that he may not be anymore at this age, but in terms of resumes, Frankie Edgar is just going to stack up on top of Chris Gutierrez here on a plus 180 in MSG, basically his hometown in a retirement fight. Like, give it to me all day long. I'll take it.
Man, what is there to say about Frankie Edgar, man? I mean, you're talking about a future Hall of Famer, 30th UFC fight, former lightweight champion with 3 title defenses. I mean, it's kind of like a sob story when you're, talking about a fighter who, you've been watching since you first started, in the, late 2000s. And, to see him now retiring, it's unfortunate, I mean, he made his UFC debut in 2007 at UFC 67, for crying out loud. And now we get to see him in person. Like, I almost get like a little choked up talking about it because, man, he's just provided so much entertainment. He basically turned BJ Penn into his little child in his career, right? So, man, it's just one of those things, man. I just can't wait to see him in person, versus a guy in Gutierrez, clearly on the come up, you know what I'm saying? I mean, he is a former LFA champion, I believe, and at the end of the day, he's a pure striker. He has those really strong kicks. He's got those spinning movements, right? Where he's got to be careful because a guy in Edgar who has that wrestling base, I think was it in Gutierrez's last fight? It was versus Dana.
That's real. Yeah,
Dana. So, there was that moment where Gutierrez, there was like a wonky spinning, strike, and Dana, out of all people, took him down. And, a guy in Edgar, man, like if you're going to be a knucklehead in there and, throw, low possibility strikes that are going to land, I could see a way where Edgar, finds a takedown and does what he does best. Just beats.
I think that's a really good point. I really do. That the fact that Gutierrez does like spinning attacks, right? And against someone like Edgar that's smart, could duck underneath one of them, take you down, trip you, take your body lock. I really do see a way where Edgar can control this fight on the ground. Gutierrez isn't known for his takedown defense. As I mentioned before, he's not that good of a grappler, pretty one-dimensional. And I just really like the spot for Edgar here.
Yeah, and a guy in Edgar, I mean, he's got to utilize that IQ and just take advantage, right, of those mistakes that Gutierrez is going to make. And I think that's really his path here. I think that if Edgar isn't going to try to attempt to take this to the mat, I just think he's going to get beat up, man. But I mean, we've seen time and time again in his UFC career the way he's able to rely on that wrestling base, not look for the submission, but just control from top and just land blows at ease. And that's going to be the path here. His retirement fight, I'd hate to see him go down, but with it being his 30th UFC fight at MSG, versus a guy in Gutierrez who isn't necessarily proven quite yet, obviously a pretty significant step in competition. I do lean Edgar in this spot.
Yeah, I mean, not much to add. I think it's a good fight for Edgar. It's a winnable fight for Edgar. It's so, and on the Gutierrez side, at the same time, it's an opportunity for him to get a big name on his record. Gutierrez has been one of these guys that's just been just consistently winning fights, and very creative stand up. I think for him to beat Frankie, he's going to have to chop at Edgar's legs. And Gutierrez, I mean, he comes from the same camp as Jonathan Martinez, who we saw not too long ago, dismantle Cub Swanson. I think that's going to be a big part of his game plan. Land those calf kicks early, and from there, it's really going to come down to if Frankie can control him for 3 rounds, because I think we can both agree that Frankie's finishing upside isn't quite there. I had him against Cheeto, and he was winning that fight, and he was gassing. Cheeto was able to catch him late, but we were all seeing Frankie slow down, and that's just because I think he knows his path to victories is more or less strictly kind of like a 3-round lane prey at this point in his career. So that's my only hesitation with Frankie here. I think it's a winnable fight. I think he can absolutely land takedowns. I mean, Gutierrez has been controlled, 3 rounds by Cody Durden, who's a great wrestler himself, but at the same time, nothing. I would put Frankie, his wrestling accolades right up there with any of those guys. So winnable fight for Frankie. I'm on the fence. I don't know if it's enough for me to bet Frankie. I'm definitely going to be rooting for him. That's for sure. But I'm just hesitant of Gutierrez knows Frankie's path here, so I don't know if he'll open up too much with the fancy stuff. I think he's going to be a little bit more conservative, stay within himself, and really chop at those legs. And Frankie's been, we've seen him eat leg kicks and have it hinder his mobility. And for a guy like him whose style is so reliant on movement, that's a tough ask. You chop out one of his legs and it kind of takes throws his whole game plan out the window. So no pick for me right now. My heart is the Frankie though, for sure. I mean, one of the OGs in the sport. He broke my heart when he beat one of my favorite fighters, BJ Penn, twice. So he's always been kind of this heartbreaker for me.
You're right, Kev. I think you're muted.
My bizzle for shizzle. I was saying I think he beat BJ Penn 3 times, if I'm not mistaken. 2 times in a title fight, and then a third a little bit later in their career. I'll have to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Either way, I mean, it's.
Dave tries to forget about it. Clearly, he's so heartbroken over it.
Yeah, but BJ Penn later on in his career, I mean, you can't really pay attention to that. I mean, BJ Penn is one of the reasons why I started doing jiu-jitsu back in the day. Right? This is over a decade ago, so it's like, in his prime, I think BJ Penn at lightweight is one of the most dominant champions of all time in his heyday.
Yeah.
That's undisputed, right? I think when you look at most dominant champs of all time, you got to include our boy Frankie Edgar in that discussion a little bit, though, right?
He had a good run. He was winning the lightweight title as an undersized lightweight.
That's crazy.
Super impressive. And the fact that he's, he fought for the title at 145. He fought for the title at 135. Seems like he probably should have been at 135 his whole career. So, it's certainly going to be sad that we won't get to see him fight again. But silver linings, again, I'll be rooting for him for sure. I do hope he gets the W in front of his hometown, and that's it.
Yeah, just epic that we get to watch it. I think that's our silver lining here.
Yeah, and I wrote down a list. It seems like the story of 2022 has been like these older fighters that we've witnessed for so many years not perform the way we want them to in 2022. I've got a list here. So Donald Cerrone, Robbie Lawler, Jose Aldo, put Dom Cruz in there. He did get knocked out. Olenek, Cub Swanson, Means, Arlovsky, Tony, RDA. I mean, like all these guys, right? Like all these veterans that we have seen just dominate with force in the 2010s, didn't perform in 2022. And man, like with it being in the Big Apple, like knowing that this is Edgar's like retirement fight, his 30th UFC fight, I think that this is going to be a little different here. I think that he wants this win really, really bad in New York. And I know he's going to just leave his heart out there. And man, I just can't wait for this retirement speech, man.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, Father Time is the great equalizer, but we spoke about this a few weeks ago, right? About which base is the most important base to have that will lead to, likelier outcome in your favor. And we all agreed that wrestling base really is just the most dominant of them all. And Frankie Edgar kind of proves that point here. So in a matchup where the other guy isn't a great grappler, really doesn't have, he has knockout power, right? But it's going to come off something freaky or a leg kick. So, can't reiterate enough. I really like Frankie Edgar plus 180 here. Wouldn't be surprised if it crosses the plus 200 mark. A little bit different though. Like last week with Amanda Lemos, I sat up here and I said I would bet her at even money at minus 110. I can't say the same about Frankie Edgar here, right? Like part of the reason why I am inclined to bet him is because of the line being close to 2-1. But enough of that fight. Let's move on to probably the most exciting fight on the entire card. This could be a main event on any fight night it wants to be. I think people would even pay for this if it was a main event on a pay-per-view in its own right. But we got Dustin Poirier taking on Michael Chandler. Chandler coming off the knockout of the year over Tony Ferguson, one of the craziest head kick knockouts you'll ever see, right beside Frankie Edgar's head kick knockout loss versus Chito Vera last year. Taking on Dustin Poirier, who first fight in a while, man, since he lost to Charles Oliveira a year ago. Haven't seen much from him, but what a spot for him to get back on track here. As it currently sits, I believe he's around minus 200 with the comeback on Michael Chandler around plus 170. Man, I'm gonna let Kev start this one off because he's the only one on Chandler here.
Look, I mean, like, don't act like it's no conviction. It's just one of those things that I just kind of feel in my heart. But, you know, I got to give credit where credit's due. And Poirier, man, again, one of those guys that we've seen, you know, just be a staple of the UFC for so many years. A guy that got grandfathered into the UFC, right, from the WEC, if I'm not mistaken, back in 2010. So, you know, just such a veteran, man. I mean, he's fought so many great guys in this octagon. You know, 20 UFC wins in this lightweight division, which is incredibly difficult to do. Clearly, you know, future Hall of Famer, veteran of the UFC. I mean, just truly, just a menace. You know, I mean, submitted Max Holloway in his UFC debut. I mean, like, it's just one of those things, man. You just got to give credit where credit's due. And a guy in Chandler, man. I mean, say what you want about him. For me personally, you know, coming into the UFC from Bellator has to have been one of the highly touted guys from that, you know, promotion coming into the UFC. And I don't think I can confidently say that he's, you know, left a mark yet in the UFC, man. I mean, 2-2, you know, obviously losing to like quality opponents, but, you know, I don't want to say that he's underperformed in the UFC, but I think,
come on. From an entertainment standpoint, he's delivered more than anyone in recent memory.
You're right. And this is a big spot for him. I think this is like a really tell-all be-all that like this is about to really elevate him. You know, I mean, obviously he's had his chances already, but this will be a spot where, man, if you can get past Poirier, you know, that'd be a sight to behold. You know, I just one of those things, man. You know, when this matchup got slated, you know, like, man, Poirier, there's just so many miles on that tank, man. I mean, obviously he's incredibly skilled. He's so well-rounded. And he's just a solid fighter, man. He's a true fighter. And a guy in Chandler, you know, man, I mean, we saw what he did to Tony. It was brutal, absolutely brutal. And I think if you're really just talking about the true finishing upside in this spot, I do favor Chandler. And, you know, for that reason, I'm just going to lean Chandler here. You know, it's nothing strong.
What?
I know you guys are going to boo me, but I will be playing Chandler by knockout.
How's he finish him? Knockout?
Yeah.
You tell me Dustin Poirier, who's fought 35 times professionally, been knocked out twice, is going to get knocked out by Michael Chandler?
No, see, you know, I can understand that being his take on the fight, because Chandler knockout is the only way that he's winning this fight. Let's be honest. He is not going to lay and pray for 3 rounds and try to out-wrestle Poirier. Chandler likes to put on entertaining fights. Poirier likes to put on entertaining fights, and we know what's going to happen here. These guys are going to stand in the middle, and, you know, Chandler does have the power to put anybody out. You know, his wrestling is good enough that he can throw caution to the wind and throw everything that he has in his shots and not really worry about the takedown. And, you know, that's dangerous. I think, you know, in the Gaethje fight, we saw Chandler get picked apart. We saw Gaethje stay within himself, not overextend too much, and really just have a measured approach, because he knew that the danger was always there. And you know, he got rocked a couple of times, but staying within himself, I mean, he made it look pretty easy. And I think that's what Dustin needs to do here. Just not get sucked into a brawl, land the better shots, land more volume, and he should cruise to a decision here. I think he can absolutely finish Chandler here. I think Chandler is absolutely very hittable. And I think that his chin is suspect. He's been knocked out multiple times. He's been dropped multiple times. In that fight against Ferguson, I gave that first round to Ferguson, you know?
Me too.
I get that it was a beautiful knockout, but, like, again, it's Tony Ferguson on a 4-fight losing skid, who is a shell of what he once was. So, yeah, it looks great for the highlight reel. Absolutely. One of the best knockouts of the year. But Dustin Poirier is not over the hill yet, and he needs to remind people that, I think, on Saturday. So yeah, give me Dustin all day long here. I think he's barring again, we've seen Dustin get clipped and knocked out before. In this fight against Michael Johnson, that kind of came as a surprise to a lot of people. Michael Johnson has some of the quickest hands in MMA. So, and he fought him at a time where Johnson was still, I believe he was still ranked at that time. So, definitely an L that I think he took on the chin and came back stronger. I just think Dustin's seen it all, been through it all here, and a 3-round fight. I just don't see where Chandler can win outside of a knockout here. So, give me the guy that has more paths to victory, the guy who's going to be throwing more volume, and the guy who has the better hands, quite frankly, the better technique. And yeah, Dustin all day, man.
Hey, if you need another metric, he's also a southpaw going against an orthodox, which are historically coming out on top there. But it is worth noting, last week's guest, Mike Davis, did say Dustin Poirier is the hardest hitting guy he's ever been touched by in his life. So with
Here's
someone
another
like
saber metric for you. Dustin Poirier just launched his new hot sauce, an ode to Canadian maple syrup. So
Really?
Wow,
absolutely.
And if I'm not mistaken, didn't he just have a partnership deal with the UFC over his hot sauce?
I don't know if that's I don't think that's official or anything. At least I haven't heard, but it's he did just announce that new hot sauce this week. So I think I look for that to be promoted at the press conference this week. Matt, maybe if you're there, you can snag a bottle. But
that'll be sick. I'll try my best. I don't know if that helps or hurts my case for Poirier though, because it reminds me of like Proper 12 and McGregor promoting during the week and just obviously losing almost every single fight since then. So I don't know if you could compare apples to oranges, but it's a definitely a favor metric.
Chandler he's good on the mic, and that's why he's been in these high profile fights since he came into the UFC, because the guy can cut a promo. And again, I think that's when we see this time and time again, where you don't necessarily have to be the best fighter to get the biggest fights. You just need to be a guy that people want to watch. And Chandler's a guy that people want to watch because of his look, because of how well spoken he is, and because again he fights a fan friendly style. So I think skill for skill, I think Dustin is just better. And again, we saw what he did to Eddie Alvarez. You saw what Eddie Alvarez did to Michael Chandler. You saw what Dustin did to Justin Gaethje. You saw what Justin Gaethje did to Michael Chandler. Mm-hmm. I just don't see it outside again of a knockout here. And I'll be laying some probably a multi-unit play on Dustin on my side.
Yeah, if there's one thing about Chandler with his, time in the UFC that I'm just kind of scratching my head about is, this is a guy that has a pretty glorified wrestling D1 career. And he doesn't really show that base much like in the UFC. You know what I'm saying? Like he really doesn't show that initiative to take down this fight. And, just watching the Justin Gaethje fight, man, like I almost felt like Chandler's ego kind of got in the way in that fight where, he was just kind of bringing him on, and we're like, dude, just take him down and beat the snot out of him. It was there. And I think that
Justin Gaethje is a great wrestler too, man. It's not that easy.
Yeah, but also Chandler wasn't cognitive to the fact that he was in the fight. Like he was acting like it was like just brawl out from that point on. It was 1-1 going to the third round. He just had no idea about it.
Was it though? I didn't really have it 1-1. I thought
Gaethje... the scorecards. I believe it was 1-1 on the scorecards. At least one or two of them.
Was it? Yeah, I can't remember the exact scorecards. I just remember the eye test. I mean, Chandler clipped him early in the first, but besides that, I mean, Gaethje more or less controlled the entire fight. So,
yeah. No, look, the way I'm envisioning it, I'm not envisioning a Poirier flatline here. The way I see it, say what's good to Snoop. The way I see it, I think that Chandler is going to find a takedown here, and I don't think Poirier is going to be able to get up. And I just think Chandler's going to rain down elbows from hell and finish the fight. That's just the way I see it. Again, I have a lot of respect for Poirier, what he's brought to the UFC. But I just think that with the stakes at MSG in the Garden, that's just what I envision. I just think Chandler's going to find something miraculous here on Saturday.
And to play devil's advocate a little bit for you, Kev, on your side, it is worth noting. I mean, last fight against Charles Oliveira for Dustin Poirier, he got taken down and just accepted it, right? He just said, I'm going to stay here and just sweat out this round. Obviously, it's due to Oliveira's jiu-jitsu credentials, and basically you make one wrong move and you're done. So you wound up getting submitted anyway. But DP has showed us, he's not terrific off his back, and someone like Chandler, who does have a very strong wrestling base, who can control people underneath him, if he does decide to take that route, I think it's the smartest way to go. I think I contrary to what Dan said, I think that Chandler, if he chose to, I think he actually could control DP on the mats, but he's been singing a little bit of a different tune. I mean, Chandler for the last 2-3 years has been singing, I just want to put on entertaining fights. I came into the UFC to put on entertaining fights, but accepting this fight and the lead up to it, he's talking about championship. I want another shot at the belt. I want to fight Islam Makhachev. I'm the best matchup for Islam Makhachev. It makes you wonder, does he kind of throw that entertainment aspect to the side and just, I'm going to do whatever I can from this point out to get the dub? I mean, if so, that would scare me a little bit as a Dustin Poirier backer.
Michael Chandler loses on Saturday and fights Conor McGregor in his next fight. You heard it here first.
That'll be epic. I mean, I think for the fans' sake, that's the best matchup to make.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean,
absolutely.
We almost it almost felt like that would have been Chandler's next fight, right? I mean, the way he called him out. I mean, it was like
it's a perfect fight. Perfect fight. Two guys that can talk. Chandler will be coming off an L. And it makes sense to give what I think is a very winnable fight for Conor.
Yeah. Yeah. And one last thing, man, about Poirier, you already know that he's going to bring it. Like every fight that he fights in, it's just like an unlimited amount of hunger motivation this guy has. So going to be a fun one, boys. I cannot wait for this fight. Man, it's going to be a great one.
Yeah. If he could deliver half as much as Gaethje versus Chandler did in MSG last year, we're in for a fucking treat, boys. So, I mean, the stakes are high. I think the expectations are high. And as far as talent goes, it doesn't get much higher than that matchup. But, talking about high level of talent, let's move on to this co-main event. We have the women's strawweight title. Carla Esparza looks to defend her belt for the second time. And let's see if she could do it against Zhang Weili, coming off a huge knockout win over Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Fought for the belt 2 times prior against Rose Namajunas, lost both. First one by head kick knockout. Second one by decision, a fight where she just needed to stuff 1 or 2 takedowns to get the belt and take it home, which is not a good sign going against someone like the Cookie Monster and Carla Esparza, who is going to grapple you, and that's about it. She's not going to look to strike with you on the feet. She's just going to look to snatch legs and get you down there. And where the value currently sits on this fight is outrageous, man. I mean, Carla Esparza plus 285 underdog. Zhang Weili going off at minus 310, minus 315. It's a head scratcher. And I think that's what makes betting this fight, for me at least, a little bit more difficult, because it kind of forces your hand into betting Carla Esparza, which I think seems intentional. I really do. Obviously, you could look at it for what it is, in the fact that Rose Namajunas out wrestled Zhang Weili to win a title, right? And you could look at that for what it is and say, well, shit, Carla could do the same thing, probably better, because look at who she's done it against and the relentlessness in which she pushes takedowns. But it is worth noting that Rose was getting takedowns via trips, and most of what Carla's takedown attempts are singles and doubles. We haven't really seen Weili fight off too many wrestling attacks where it comes to singles and doubles, so it's kind of hard to judge where her defense will be there. I believe she still trains a team alpha male, getting good work in, especially in the grappling department. We did see improvements in her grappling, I think, from the first Rose fight. Well, from prior to the first Rose fight until the Joanna Jędrzejczyk fight. And it's just a difficult fight for me, because on the feet, I really do think that Weili could knock out Carla Esparza. I really do. I could see it happening. Carla does not have great defense on the feet. She's a little bit slow. If takedowns get stuffed, it's a long night at the office for her. And I think that's where you'll see Zhang look like a minus 315 favorite. Obviously, if the game plan goes according to how it's supposed to, and Carla could land takedown, she's going to look like the minus 300 favorite. So it's a little bit tricky on that. And over under, I don't really have an edge here. But like I said, where the line currently sits, it just feels like it forces you to bet Carla.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. A bit of a tough fight to cap, just because, again, the line on Zhang is just for me unbettable. I do think a little bit inflated. She did finish Joanna in her last fight, but Joanna is I think she's already had her foot out the door, and Granted, we never saw her really get finished like that outside of that knockout loss to Rose Namajunas, but it was a telltale sign that I think Joanna just doesn't really have it anymore. Now, Carla is, it's crazy to think that she's the first ever champion in this division, and she's literally, started at the top, had to work her way from the ground up. She's taken some L's. She's put together a string of victories against some top level fighters in the division, and credit to her. I mean, capturing that title. Granted, it wasn't the most exciting fight, but she stuck to a game plan. I think it was a fight that was really set up perfectly for her because, granted, she already had the win over Rose. I think the mental edge, and Rose being the kind of fighter that, again, you kind of question the mental strength, I think did play a factor in there. She was a little bit too tentative to engage Carla because of the fear of the takedown. And ultimately, those small moments that there were, Carla was able to, kind of edge out in the judge's eyes, and she was able to win. So not the most impressive win, but again, capturing the title for a second time. I think this fight, for her to win, it's kind of no secret what she has to do, right? She needs to land takedowns. We've seen that if she can land the top position, she can ride out rounds. She can control women on the ground. And I just, Zhang has improved so much in so many facets of her game that I have a hard time really believing that it's going to be very easy for Carla to just take her down. I think a lot of the takedowns that Carla will have to land will have to be opportunistic, catch Weili overextending, coming in and countering with the takedown. I think if she can do that, she'll be able to steal rounds, and I do anticipate this going the distance. Just because I think Carla knows the deficiency in the stand up here, so I don't think she'll be trying to engage. But at the same time, she'll have to engage more than the Rose fight because we know that Weili is aggressive and she puts combinations together. Lands great kicks to the body, kicks to the leg, and just full arsenal of tools. So definitely a tough ask. I'm going to have a sprinkle on Carla to win here. And I do actually think that we can find ourselves on a potentially sweaty split decision. I wouldn't put it past it. It's just one of those scenarios where, again, and we've seen this time and time again in the last few UFCs where these kind of improbable scenarios just play out right in front of our eyes. So, give me a shot at Carla here.
Man, I dig the sprinkle there, and it's funny you say that split decision because I'll most definitely be playing a split decision prop in this fight.
Hey, we hit it on Carla's last fight. Had the split on Rose versus Carla like plus 450.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I just think we talk about Esparza, man, and clearly she's very one-dimensional, and that's just how it is. She really relies on that wrestling, just have that top control and control the fight. And just looking at Weili, right? I think we forget that Weili can also land takedowns. She can also strike. I mean, for one, the stand-up advantage is massive. Not only the power, but the technical ability, the volume, just everything.
The speed is going to be such a wide.
It's like night and day. It really is, man. I mean, Esparza, at the end of the day, she's slow. She doesn't really pack a punch. She doesn't really set things up on the feet. It just seems like Weili just has her covered in so many areas. And it's funny, like we talk about, Weili has a 60%, takedown defense, right? Well, Carla Esparza has a 47% takedown defense, right? So it's like, you got to look at both sides. And, you're talking about a UFC average of, 67, 68% of takedown defense there. So, I think that we're going to see a scenario of both ladies landing takedowns. A lot of this fight taking place on the mat, actually, both with Weili on top and Carla on top, both ladies being able to get up. I do envision a split decision. My heart and gut is telling me to just sprinkle a little bit on Esparza, but I just can't do it. I'm just going to play the split on this co-main and see for what it is. So that's what I'm going to be going with here. But should be. I don't really know. Like, I would love to see like a high energetic, well-rounded, lots of big moments, but I don't know, man. I just think that we're going to see a long 25-minute fight where this goes to a split. So I think that we're going to see Ngannou, but I'm just not going to bet against the Sparts in this spot.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Just to add one more thing to that, I think that the strength advantage is on the Whaley side. I mean, Carla's strong in her own right, but Whaley, you hear people like DC talk about just probably the best women's athlete he's ever seen, right? And just the strength, the athleticism, it just all really favors to her. And yeah, it's just going to be a great fight here. But without further ado, let's move on to this main event, the fight in which this card was built around. It is Israel Adesanya taking on Alex Pereira. Adesanya opened up around minus 170-ish, Alex Pereira plus 150-ish. Lines are always moving. And, Pereira 2-0 against Izzy in their professional fighting career. Both took place in kickboxing. So it's a little bit different matchup here, being that this is an MMA fight. Pereira, for what it's worth, man, 7 professional mixed martial arts fights. 7 professional mixed martial arts fights. Finds himself fighting for probably, at the moment, the most coveted belt in the UFC. I mean, Adesanya has that belt. He's held on to it for, however long it's been now. And for what it's worth, no one has even seemed like they've come remotely close to taking that belt from him. And everyone here expects Pereira to be that guy. Being that the last time these two fought, Pereira knocked out Israel Adesanya flat on the canvas. As I mentioned, that wasn't kickboxing. So will it translate over to here? I guess we'll find out. But I do want to pass this off to Kev to let the people know what our play is on this and just about how much the KP we have on this.
Yeah, man, we've got a max play, and I'm really surprised that you didn't put on those shades. Maybe not yet, but
they're coming.
Oh, okay. I'm just making sure ducks are in a row here for this spot because, guys, we got a max play on the KP. This is our first KP max play on the history of doing this thing. I want to say we're probably like 11, 12, 13 events in, around that range. So this is a big conviction here. We're all very heavy on Israel Adesanya for many reasons. There they are. Ding, ding, ding. Sound the alarms, baby. It's money shades time, baby. Ooh. Yeah.
17 units.
17 to win 10. Yep. 17 units to win 10. We got it at minus 170. I think that's a great number. And a guy in Israel Adesanya who, at the end of the day, is the face of the UFC, right? 23-1, 12-1 in the UFC with his only loss coming versus Jan Blachowicz up a weight class. I think the difference here is going to be the difference here. And this is why I'm so convicted on Israel Adesanya is because he just stays so incredibly sound defensively on the feet. He's rarely, taken multiple shots consecutively. He's rarely putting himself in danger. And, a guy in Pereira, man, I mean, he's going to be looking to take your head off. And I firmly believe that in this spot, we're going to see it early, mid round 2. Pereira is going to get frustrated. I think that Izzy is going to just tee off on him. I just think that he's going to read this harmony in motion, and it's going to be a beautiful sight to see. And look, I have a lot of respect for Pereira. I think that he will actually be back for a rematch in a title fight versus Izzy, maybe in, say, 12 to 18 months or so. But this is Israel Adesanya's time at the Garden. There's just no way Israel Adesanya is losing this fight. I just feel it in my plums. Israel Adesanya knockout round 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much more to say outside that. But let me ask you guys this. Does Alex Pereira not look like the spitting image of Sagat from Street Fighter?
Oh, my gosh. Yes.
It's actually wild. It's, just a side note. But,
Scary.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this fight, I was on the fence about this one for the last couple of weeks. You got Pereira's clear power advantage. I mean, the guy has the nuclear shot in his left hand and just about every other limb in his body. And again, you got to think there's also that mental edge. He's beaten this guy twice. He's knocked him out. So it seems like Adesanya has been like the motivation for Pereira to pursue this career in MMA. And here we find ourselves a year. And I actually, tweeted about this earlier in the week. I think a year to the day where I put out Alex Pereira by KO against Andreas Michailidis, and pretty much put that as free a play as you can think. And you think about it. So here we are a year from then, and he's fighting for the title, right? So what a difference a year makes. And you got to think, with all that being said, it's I actually kind of liken this little rivalry to Vanderlei Silva, Rampage Jackson.
Mm.
Vanderlei, absolute killer. Finished in brutal fashion Rampage twice in Pride, and albeit it was later on in their career, but we were able to see Rampage get that revenge that he was searching for, and I see this being that type of play. I really do think that Izzy is going to be finishing Pereira here. In their last kickboxing fight, Adesanya had Pereira on skates, and he came out super aggressive in that third round and ended up getting clipped. So I do think that he won't be throwing sort of balls to the walls, but I do think we'll see a more aggressive Adesanya. He knows that the grappling threat is non-existent here. So I think, again, I would not be surprised if we actually see some sort of scenario where Adesanya maybe tries to maybe not land a takedown, but just maybe use some cage work, use some clinch work, and turn it into a real MMA fight. I think when it's a technical kickboxing match, you got to give the speed and accuracy to Izzy, but again, you got that nuclear shot from Pereira that he can land at any time. So I think Izzy's a smart fighter. Certainly, his IQ is one of his biggest strengths in there. I think he knows what's in front of him. He knows everything, the challenges that Pereira presents. And I think he's ready. He's ready for this fight. This is a legacy fight for him. He wins this fight, and he's essentially cleared out his division. They are really reaching to find some contenders for this guy. So, Adesanya. I mean, obviously, it's our max play. Probably going to be on max play on a personal note, but I like the inside the distance here. I think we're going to see something that we haven't seen from a while from Israel Adesanya, and that's a nice finish.
Yeah, and you already know that Izzy's been hearing the naysayers. He's boring. He's this. He doesn't show urgency. And you already know, with this being his 7th title defense, that this is by far the most prominent one, right? I mean, you're getting knocked out by a guy in the kickboxing scene, losing the decision. And now you have this opportunity to defend your belt at the UFC at Madison Square Garden. There's just no way I envision a world where Pereira is finishing Izzy. That is the only path. I think that, like you said, the IQ massively favors Izzy, right? I mean, when you've got a guy with 24 MMA fights versus a guy with 7, sure, he beat him twice in kickboxing. Mind you, that was a long time ago. Israel Adesanya learned from that, and he has turned himself into one of the greatest UFC fighters we've ever seen.
For a little context here, Israel Adesanya's fought for the belt 8 times. Being the middleweight and light heavyweight belt, capturing it and defending it 8 times. He has fought for the belt on the line. Alex Pereira has 7 professional MMA fights, so I think that you need to add a little context there, because people watching this might be confused why we're so heavy on a -170 favorite that's 0-2 against his opponent, right? In combat sports. So I think we have to add a little bit of context there. And, to back it up, man, I encourage everyone who's watching this to take the time to watch these 2 kickboxing matches that took place between both these men, because that first fight, questionable decision, I guess we call it, not questionable, but a very close fight, very competitive, really could have gone either way, the decision. Second fight, Izzy was styling on Alex Pereira, right? Styling on him until he got caught. And that is, the whole MO with this fight, right? I mean, Izzy could look as great as he wants for 24 minutes, but if he slips up for 1 minute, Alex Pereira can end it in a flash. And that's kind of the balance we have to find ourselves in here with this fight. But man, Alex Pereira has shown signs of slowing down in the octagon. He does not have 5-round cardio. I know people were knocking Lemos for this same thing last week, but I was telling people that Lemos can put on a 5-round pace. She can be reserved in there. She could pick and choose her shots effectively, and she could kind of extrapolate her gas tank over 5 rounds. She didn't need it last week. She finished it in the 3rd round, but I think we can all agree she looked like she was going to be able to go on another 10, 15 minutes in there. I don't get that same feeling with Alex Pereira here. I mean, he's too muscle heavy. He's too reliant on his power for it to carry all 5 rounds. And answer me this, when was the last time we saw Izzy get fucking cracked?
Doesn't
happen. Gasoline.
Yeah, exactly. How long ago was that? That was the last time he ate a clean shot. And who's he fought since then? Rob Whitaker twice. He fought Jared Cannonier. He fought Yoel Romero, right?
Mhm.
Like, he's fighting hard hitters. Like, I understand Poatan hits fucking harder than anybody else, but the guy was just plus 100 against Sean Strickland a few months back, right? So to add a little more context here, he was like minus 200 versus Bruno Silva. So to find himself only plus 150 against arguably one of the greatest middleweights of all time in the UFC, you know,
Minus 110 KO inside the distance against Andreas Michailidis. Like, I mean,
exactly.
listen, that's
A
free
year
money,
ago,
but that's free money. But at the same time, like when I saw that, I was like, is that a joke? It was, and I remember that fight, right? There was some early adversity for Pereira.
he
So
lost the first round decisively.
yeah. And I think it's a good point about his power not necessarily carrying over to the later rounds. I know that he's training with Glover and the team over there, and there's certainly no slouches. I mean, I think he's going to come in ready. I just do think that Izzy will be able to come out on top and land the cleaner, sharper shots, not get hit, and I do think he finishes here.
Yeah, and all things considered, I mean, when you're talking about Pereira, you're really putting a 7.5 minute window, right, for him to truly land that clip. Because we know with that power, with that muscle mass, it's going to diminish as the fight goes on. And man, just the way Pereira stays off that center line, it's very, very tricky to land. And like you guys say, you see the Pereira, you see the muscles, you see the tattoos, you see him looking like a boogie monster out the closet. At the end of the day, man, Adesanya is going to steamroll this man. There is no way he is losing. The fact that, and I will point this out because we do talk about this a little bit just with perspectives, man. The fact that Usman just lost his belt, I cannot imagine a world where Usman and Adesanya lose their belt within 3 months. Like, I just don't see it, man. So we're going all in. Adesanya, knockout. Let's fucking roll, boys.
Honestly, might get a little weird. I think I might play a little Adesanya submission at like plus 1800. I know he's been talking about wanting to get that submission in the UFC, and like, man, what better way to get it than against the guy who beat you twice in the kickboxing scene? They kind of built him up. This matchup to me kind of reminds me of like when McGregor was making his huge come up and he was beating everyone in the UFC. They kept being like, let's bring Joe Duffy into the UFC, the one guy who beat Conor McGregor, and let's see him go. Joe Duffy was a fucking nobody, right? Like, he got that win over McGregor on the regional scene, but made nothing of himself outside of there. So it kind of gets that same feeling like there's no one else for Israel Adesanya to fight. So, hey, let's fast track the guy that beat him twice in a completely different sport. And after 3 fights in the UFC, let's just, propel him up the ladder to Israel Adesanya. Let's make everyone believe that he has a very good chance of beating Israel Adesanya, because I think that is like the whole allure, because it's gotten to a point now where most people don't want to buy Israel Adesanya pay-per-view cards, right? Because they know how it's going to end. It's going to be a tactical Floyd Mayweather like 25-minute performance where he doesn't get hit once by a single clean shot, and he just kind of, dances, gets into a flow state, picks off clean shots, and just stays out of the way. But, the UFC's done a great job of building this fight up. They've built up Poatan, as well as they could, someone with 3 fights in the UFC fighting for a title. So, I think it's going to be fireworks, but don't sleep on the Izzy submission here. I think he's long enough to get it done. I think Pereira is kind of lost enough on the ground where he could get it done. And if this goes to round 4, round 5, like we see every single Adesanya fight go, we could see, a completely gassed out Alex Pereira and, who knows, maybe a club and sub. I could see it. I could really see like a bulldog choke or something crazy like that coming in.
It's only right to go through the translation of what Poatan really means. Poatan means stone hand.
That's fucking spot on.
Stone hand. So
mahogany hand, like Joe Rogan would say.
That's the most accurate depiction ever. He literally looks like he's built of mahogany.
Right, man. Oh my gosh, I cannot wait for this car, boys. I just got that feeling we're all going to be together and we are going to cash in big.
Absolutely.
And first round's on Matt.
First round's on me. I got the worst showing out of Tapology between the 3 of us last week by like 5 points. So first round's on me.
I got to give you a shout out though for Lemos. I had a small play on Rodriguez that I hedged off, and I did put a live bet on Lemos, and it was because of the conviction. So I got to give you your props there for sure.
Yeah, and if one is watching this video, never doubt Proto's women's MMA handicapping. Like, It's truly miraculous, man. Like I really just have to give credit where credit's due, because it is incredible. It really is. I mean,
unless they're German.
Mandy Bohm, that one still haunts me, man. Mandy Bohm will haunt me forever.
Yeah, I mean, you called that Shonen Yan big underdog in the last pay-per-view. You called the one, yesterday. I mean, it's just like, it's awesome, man. And it never, do not bet against this man when it comes to women's mixed martial arts.
I'll tell you this much: if every main event for fight nights was a women's MMA fight, I would be like Jeff Bezos by now. Between Grasso, Lemos, Yan Jonan, the list goes on. But you know what, guys? It's all luck. Half this thing is it's just luck. So I'm happy that
unless you got James Krause in your corner, right?
Then you make your own luck. You make your own luck with that case. But man, I'm just happy we were able to cash that big plus 200 underdog heading into this week. We need the units so we could throw them all on Israel Adesanya, boys. And man, I'm pumped up. I know you guys are pumped to come into town. Hopefully I could do my best host job to get you guys ready to go for UFC 281 Saturday night. I can't believe it's here, but without further ado, thank you guys. There will be no Twitter space this week, for we will all be in New York City. There will be a Knights of Degen happy hour going on in the afternoon. If you guys are in the New York City area, make sure you stop by. More details will follow in the Knights of Degen Discord as well. Hit us up on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Fight Night KOD. Follow
like and subscribe.
Follow KOD Kev Dog on Twitter, and follow myself at Proto Prophet on Twitter. We will make sure to deliver the content for you guys this weekend. And as always, enjoy the fights, make some money, and let's cash out.
Let's go, boys.